everyone. Thank you for joining us for another edition of Texas Insider TV, brought to you by SpeedStream. I'm Jim Cardle. With a state budget crunch and transparency in government waste and fraud in our state legislative process, today we're pleased to be able to visit with Raul Torres, member of the House Appropriations Committee. Raul, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
You are a CPA by profession.
Yep.
You are from South Texas, Corpus Christi, House District 33. Pardon me. You're running for the state Senate, District 20. Let me ask you though first, before we get into some of that politicking stuff. You've been doing your job today. You've been over at the state legislature. You were saying as a member of the Appropriations Committee. Tell us what's going on, what you all were looking at, and what's the status of the appropriations process getting ready for the upcoming session.
Well, thank you, Jim, because it's something that the taxpayers of Texas really need to know what's going on behind the scenes, as people often say. This morning we dealt with the issue of the budgeting process and transparency. What was discussed this morning, the gentleman from the comptroller's office talked about a $4.9 billion that the comptroller had certified this past budget for expenditures. And what we learned during that process of questioning is that even though the comptroller certifies the almost $5 billion that was put into the budget, we don't have access to the cash. It comes from dedicated funds that have been structured over many years that accumulate money from one biennium to the next biennium.
So you're talking about special fees, almost a unique little pot.
That's
that
correct.
Is transferred by and large away from its intended use toward the general fund.
No, what the comptroller's representative said is the monies are there because of the intended use, but there's no cap on it. Similar to the TIF tax that we collected many years beyond its usefulness,
yes,
and finally got eliminated a couple of sessions ago. So these funds are collecting money, but there's no cap on it. And because the number grows bigger, they are certified, a big portion of them, to be used in the budgeting process. So the legislature uses that figure and creates a budget or expenditures to utilize those funds. But when the time comes to pay the bill, there's no money from these funds to pay those bills.
Surprise, surprise. I want to get back to that in a second, but also real briefly, because it's a big issue around Texas with our surprising growth, and that's transportation. You all talked a little bit about transportation, which is a concern too.
We talked about 2 hours about transportation this afternoon. We heard from several witnesses who talked about the state of transportation from a funding, from a debt service, and from a future needs point of view. And right now, bottom line, this is what we heard. If the state does not find a revenue source for transportation, the state has already run out of money.
Okay.
There'll be no more money available for transportation. We borrowed up to the hill, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
And the gentleman from the construction industry said, basically concurred, that the money will run out on projects. All these projects, as far as this disbursement, should come to an end on 2016, 2017. Bottom line, if there's no more revenues, there'll be no more new construction projects on the ground, improving our economy and our roads after 2017.
Okay, you're a CPA. We'll have to have you back on that transportation issue. It's a big subject to itself. But as a CPA, you've been Legislator of the Year, top 10 legislator by various groups. Great work on the Appropriations Committee. But there's this program, one of your signal pieces of legislation regards efficiency, waste, fraud, and abuse, known as Lean Six Sigma. Talk a little bit about how we can save some money that can be used elsewhere through your efforts there.
Thank you, Jim. I'm glad you brought that up. Senate Bill 563, that originated in the House, I believe, under HB 3149, is without question, I believe, a critical and very important piece of legislation that we passed this past session. There's no other bill in America like it. We had to find ways to how to write up the language.
There was no template.
There's no template to follow.
Okay.
But the idea is to find a way to make government more efficiency. Now, everybody talks about fraud, waste, and abuse. Everybody does. And we kind of hit around the fringes and find little pockets of change here and there. But at the end of the day, most people don't do anything about it. This bill has the potential to generate a cost savings of about 25% of our GR budget, which translates to about $20 billion. Now, $20 billion will go a long way to help service the transportation issues that we need funding for, the Medicaid funding issues that we're waiting for, the education funding issues that we are so many people are demanding for, plus so many other growing demands on the economy and our state budget. But for some reason or another, change comes very slowly at the Texas legislature.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes that can be a good thing. Usually,
That's right.
You don't want things to move too fast. So what you're talking about is last legislative session, you all came in, you're faced with a $10 billion shortfall.
27.
Everybody's expecting
This time,
something
yes.
similar this time.
Mm-hmm.
Is this going to be a way that you anticipate that we can redivert some funds or utilize some funds through cost savings as opposed to more spending? Is there the will there, I guess?
I certainly hope so, because we all talk the rhetoric about prioritizing.
Mm-hmm.
All right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're beginning to get to the point where almost everything is moving up to the number one position. Everything's critical. And in reality, Jim, it is, because everything is interconnected. Education is connected to the economy. Economy is connected to transportation. Transportation is connected to quality of life. And it goes on and on.
Down in your area, you've got border security and the drug cartels impacting things.
That's correct, and it's getting worse.
The safety of the economic
Yes, sir.
environment.
So I believe that this system or this piece of legislation is the way to create a cost savings where we can divert those funds that right now is basically waste, being currently used in other parts of the state government that could be better utilized for the benefit and the growth of our economy.
I'd imagine you'll have more and more support there, certainly from the voters and the Texas populace, based on what you're saying there. Let's close on this again, folks. We're visiting with State Representative Raul Torres from Corpus Christi, running for the Senate District 20 down in South Texas. Representative, if I can ask you pointedly a question or two about the campaign. You're running against a long-term incumbent, Senator Hinojosa. What are your issues down there on the ground? What are you talking about to differentiate yourself?
We're basically talking about two things that the public keeps telling us is important to us: jobs and education. Jim, when you live in a region of the state where 80% or more of the population is classified as poor or under the poverty guidelines of the federal government,
Okay.
are poor, and where now the dropout rate among Hispanics is approaching 50%. Education has to be on the forefront of the issues. We need to fix that, because this is a part of our state where most people, the best they're getting as far as education is maybe a high school diploma. Mm-hmm. Well, we can attract industry throughout Texas if we cannot provide them the workforce they're asking for, the educated, skilled workforce they're asking for. And so that's why this is a big issue for a lot of people down there. And for myself, for South Texas, for too long, I believe South Texas has been left out of the overall equation formula. Not that we haven't gotten funding. We haven't gotten our fair share of funding, and the different opportunities that other people have in the state of Texas are not present in South Texas, and I want to change that.
Is there a sense, because of not only that dynamic, but also the just changing political environment, do your constituents down there, do voters feel that they have a sense of trust in our government? What's the general feeling down there that you see?
Well, if they did, they don't anymore, because of the situation that happened this past year under the budget. The area down in South Texas is heavily relies upon the budget.
Okay.
And so when the state had to cut back on some of the projected funding or based on needs, then the impact was greater in South Texas, I believe, than any other part of the state. Teachers were laid off. Entrepreneurs are not starting businesses like perhaps other parts of the state. Highway transportation funds are not being expended as in the same proportion as other part of the state. Everything's come to a much smaller snail pace as far as growth in South Texas, and yet the population is probably outpacing the rest of the state.
Well, population is a significant issue. We're going to have you come back, visit about that in the future, if you will.
Thank you, Jim.
Representative Raul Torres, grandson of a immigrant, a CPA, sounds like someone who is a politician that can count, restoring voter trust. Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you,
today.
Jim. I appreciate you having me.
Remember, folks, to tune back in for future editions of Texas Insider TV. You're either an insider or you're not. I'm Jim Cardle. Thanks for joining us.